Welcome back to the show where we run you through all the Dolphins news you need to know about. After you run through the news you need to know about, we run you through the fan Q&A, we answer fans' questions. Lots of off-season news. I think a lot of this news is going to make Dolphins fans really happy. This is, I think, the biggest... It's funny, like, the Dolphins fixed the O-line, which I think they did a really good job of actually getting quality starters. We have, in my opinion, the best offensive line we've had since Mike McDaniel's been here. But the one glaring hole this offseason that hasn't been addressed is the defensive backfield. And with the departures of Javon Holland and Jalen Ramsey, the Dolphins haven't really done much other than shout out to Minkah Fitzpatrick coming back in a Dolphins uniform. That's pretty hype. Other than that, which was a godsend, by the way, phenomenal trade. I mean, when you really look at this offseason, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but it's been pretty good. But the cornerback room is, very unproven. The only one that's really who we know what we're getting from is Kader Kohou, who's a very solid slot starter. He's not good on the outside. I think we've all found that out the hard way, but he's a pretty good slot corner. So they need corners, and that leads us to our first news story. And also want to say this. Barry Jackson, and I've said this many times, but he's the only one who does actual reporting for the Dolphins. Like, I don't know why all the other beat writers, it's all just speculation. He seems to be the only one that actually has sources for some reason. But anyway, this first news story is an update on Rasul Douglas. Barry Jackson of the Miami Herald notes that the team and Rasul have not been too far apart with respect to contract terms when they have been in contact with each other. As a result, he predicts Rasul Douglas' deal could be worked out sometime in the summer. So, preferably before training camp, hopefully. But it is interesting. I remember it was reported earlier that Rasul Douglas wasn't happy with the contract, but as Barry Jackson notes in this article, they're not far apart on a contract. And he thinks, in the article, that a deal could get done. He would be a really nice addition to the team. Apparently he has a lot of suitors. He's only 29. I thought he was older. He's a very good zone corner. He's not a good man-to-man corner. He fits that cover 2 style. I mean, he did a lot of that in Buffalo. They do that a lot in Buffalo, that too high look. And obviously Anthony Weaver likes to do that. So it would be nice to have a veteran player and just be able to play him in that position. He's already good at it. He knows what to do. He knows the scheme. So, and it would be nice to have a proven player. I would say, like, when we played him last year, he did a half-decent job. But when we play Buffalo, we just have the worst luck possible. We did torch the heck out of him when we were on the road in Buffalo, though. So, I don't know. I didn't watch a ton of Rasul Douglas last year, but I know he's a good zone corner from his career. He's a good veteran player. So maybe the Dolphins can add a good veteran presence to the team. Because right now, like I said, and we all know this, but like Cam Smith, Storm Duck, like those two alone, I mean, Jason Marshall, who, I mean, I didn't love him coming out of Florida. And then Storm, I don't know what Storm Duck's career. And then Ethan Bonner is the most intriguing one because of his athleticism. But then Cam Smith, who just can't get on the field. So it's a kind of a mess of a room. So Rasul Douglas at least would be a half decent addition. I don't think it's anybody's like dream or anything, or like preferably. But this next player, I know Dolphins fans really want. And Stephon Gilmore is also still out there. I think he's a better version of Rasul Douglas because he can do more on a football field than just play zone coverage. He's still pretty good in man coverage. And he's just a better player. I mean, his pedigree alone. But this next player, I think Dolphins fans would prefer, and that's Asante Samuel. This comes from Pro Football Rumors. Cornerback Asante Samuel Jr. hasn't rolled out Dolphins. If you're not familiar, I'm not going to read this because it's stupid, but I'm sure if you guys have Dolphins YouTube stuff, you'll get recommended, or at least had gotten this recommended to you, that Asante Samuel Sr. was like ranting about the Dolphins, but I don't really care about that. What's important, because of that, I forgot to mention this, because his dad was ranting about the Dolphins and like he said some things about how Mike McDaniel was a pushover. People thought his son wouldn't have any interest in the Dolphins. But that's not true. Let's see here. Where is the exact... There was no... Okay, this is a quote from Barry Jackson. Again, another great clutch Barry Jackson report here. There was nothing... He contacted Asante Samuel Jr. and gauged his interest if he wanted to be a Dolphin. And this is what he had to say about that. Barry Jackson with Miami Herald, he said, there was nothing to suggest he wouldn't consider the Miami Dolphins if they made an offer. So, that's great. You know, he's coming off a really bad injury. I think he's the best. There's so many reasons why he's perfect. First of all, he's still young. He's very athletically gifted. He has a lot of upside still left in his career. He just can't stay healthy. And not only all that, but he fits the scheme. So, and you could build around, like, he could be a building block for the future because he's young. So, I really like him. He's also just a playmaker. Like I said, the worst thing about is just his injury history isn't very good. But scheme fit, young, building block. This would be the ideal situation and the best outcome would be acquiring him. And the fact that the Dolphins, they haven't reached out to him apparently, according to the article. But the fact that he would be willing to sign with the Miami Dolphins, even though his dad seems to hate the Dolphins, I think is interesting. I hope that they make him an offer. I would much rather have him than Russell Douglas. Maybe they can get both. Probably not. This next news story is really interesting. Dolphins wide receiver, this comes from Pro Football Rumors. Dolphins wide receiver Nick Westbrook-Ikhine dealt with undisclosed injury this offseason. The Dolphins agreed to terms with Nick Westbrook-Ikhine during this year's legal tampering period, which illustrates how highly they prioritize adding a big-bodied pass catcher to their wide receiver room, which I think is a nice illustration of their right. Like that seemed to be a priority, and I want to stick with that for a second because I was thinking about this, and they add Darren Waller because hopefully Darren Waller can be Darren Waller. I'm hoping that that's the case. If that is the case, they're much bigger than they were a year ago, especially in the red zone. And that's going to be interesting to see what kind of plays they can do. Because I actually, if you go back and watch, it would be an interesting video to put together. But the amount of fades that the Dolphins have thrown to Tyreek Hill that he's dropped in the red zone, or it's just a perfectly placed pass and he just can't come up with it because of his size. It's crazy to his ball placement on some of those throws. That were wasted because he's so short. So the fact that, and I've said this before, we haven't seen Tua with talented, bigger receivers. And Darren Waller, and I love, if you go, and any Dolphins fan should go back and watch Westbrook-Ikhine's season that he had last year. He's fast, physical, tall, great hands. I'm excited to see that on this team. It sucks that he's injured right before training camp. He's dealing with a small injury. The article goes on to say that he might miss some training camp, but it's not confirmed or anything. Definitely something that kind of sucks, start his Dolphins career that way. But I love his game. I'm really excited. I've said this. I think this offense is going to be much better than last year, and I think it's going to be really fun. The receiver core is the deepest it's been. It's not even close. I mean, people forget they have Malik Washington on this roster as well, who I think is going to make a big jump. He had such a good end to last year, and then you add Westbrook-Ikhine to the mix. That's a very, very good receiver core, and the Dolphins have dealt with Jalen Waddle injuries, obviously, a lot over the last two seasons, especially last year. And then Tyreek Hill's been banged up. Also, I've brought this up so many times, but when the Dolphins changed personnel, the drop-off from Tyreek Hill to Jalen Waddle to whoever the heck else they could, whether it was River Craycraft or Trent Sherfield, was way too big of a drop-off. And the Dolphins offense, when they had to change personnel, and they have to do it because those two can't block to save their lives, when I'm talking about Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, it's a huge tell for the other defense. And I'm sure coaches in the NFL see that on film. So the fact that they have players like Malik Washington and Westbrook who can come in and block, at least definitely better than those two can, is a big deal, because I think they still present a threat to the defense when they're on the field. So there's a lot of reasons why I think this offense is going to be better. And obviously the biggest one being the fact that I think they're going to be the most balanced they've ever been. And so, yeah, this was a great addition. And again, like I said, when you review the offseason as a whole, it's very good. I think they did a really good job of addressing their issues. I like the draft that they had. I thought it was a very good draft. I mean, you forget they added Kenneth Grant, and that was a big issue last year, was depth of defensive tackle. And Zach Sealer is a very good defensive tackle. And Kenneth Grant is exactly what they need. They don't need a guy who can come in and get, okay, this guy's going to be Aaron Donald. And he has the upside to become a really good pass rusher. But I think early on in his career, at least his first season, all we really need him to do is be a good run defender. And that's going to help out the middle linebackers who, they went out and they retained Tyler Dotson and obviously have Jordan Brooks, who had a very good season for them last year. That's going to help them out too. So I think they improved the roster a lot in a lot of different ways. And I'm excited to see this team play this year. I really am. I think this team has a lot of versatility, especially on offense. And defensively, I think they're going to be, at least in the front seven, I think they're going to be pretty special. We'll see how maybe they can add, if they add Asante Samuel Jr., if they add, I would say more Asante Samuel, that's going to make me feel like, okay, they have a guy who can match up week in and week out on the other team's best receiver fairly well. Like, athletically especially, he can match up with anybody if he can stay healthy. Because right now, it's like, who is that for them? And they don't really have that as of right now. And to add that to a secondary with Minkah Fitzpatrick, and then you add that to a really, really good front seven, then the defense, I'm not going to be worried about it at all. Like, they have two playmaking players who can make plays on the back end when you talk about Minkah and Asante. And I actually like Ashton Davis. I've always liked him. He's a solid starter in the NFL. So if he ends up starting next to Minkah, that's not bad at all. So yeah, I think the offseason is definitely coming together. I think we're all just waiting to see who the corner, like what's the final defensive back situation. Jalen Waddle made a point that the cornerbacks this year, at least in OTAs, looked really good in one of his interviews. And I don't know if I would put too much stock into that, just because, I don't know. It's not like Jalen Waddle has ever said that before. But I don't know. It's really hard to gauge things when you talk about practices. But yeah, I mean, Ethan Bonner is an interesting player. He's never really, the preseasons that he's had, he's looked good. But he's never gotten an opportunity to really play. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of shapes out, because it's obviously it definitely is a whole. And dude, I'm telling you something right now. If the Dolphins can get a 70% Darren Waller, that's actually kind of gross, because Darren Waller is a very good and very gifted player, and could present a lot of issues for defenses because of that. And he brings a different element. And like I said, Tua's never thrown to players like that, so I'm excited to see that as well. Yeah, and I think that's pretty much it. I mean, obviously it's slow. The training camp hasn't started yet, but I'm very excited for the season to start. And yeah, I guess I'll see you guys in the next one.